Did Donald Trump break the basic rules of war? And if so, what will the consequences be? Check it out. Leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Back in the 80s, Louise and I and our 3 kids lived in Germany for a year, from June of 86 to July of 87, as I recall. And we lived in this region of Germany. It was called the Frankenwald. The forest area north of Nuremberg, about an hour north of Nuremberg, and about 15 minutes south of the East German border, about 30 minutes west of the Czech border, and a little town called Steinach. And the next town over was Kulmbach, and in Kulmbach there was this giant castle. And in Steinach, in our backyard, I mean, you know, it was a walk through the forest of maybe 10 minutes, but in our backyard, there was an old castle. It was called Nordeck, which was built in 1034 and had been abandoned for hundreds and hundreds of years. It was just a ruin. And it was just in the woods. I mean, there was a little plaque on it, and that was it. People didn't know about it. There was no road to it. You know, there it was in the woods. It overlooked the Steinach River, which was a very, very small river that ran through Steinach. And, you know, it was probably a way station where they were collecting tolls. You know? And just down the road, there was another ruined castle deep in the woods. Now, I bring this up because one of the things that a friend of mine who had been in the German army, actually, and, you know, during the war, he'd been drafted, and was working with the Salem organization, this international relief organization where Louise and I were living at their headquarters, SalemInternational.org if you want to learn more about it. And then this friend of mine, his name was Horst von Heyer, he died a couple of years ago. He was, you know, when he died, he was a really old guy. But when he was drafted into the army, he was like 16. And it was in the last year of the war. I mean, he was, you know. So anyway, he told me, and I believe this to be true, but I don't know if it's true. But, you know, one of the stories that von Heyer told me was that the castles, the way that these castles got built was the local lords, and they weren't even the kings. Some of them declared themselves kings, but basically they were the local lords because the larger region had a king, would declare war against each other with a wink and a nod, with the agreement that they would never kill actually the kings or any of the king's family or any of the lord rather, or any of the minor lords, right? The rich people never would get killed in these wars, but they would pit the peasants against each other. And then they would say to the peasants, by the way, you know, you're at a war with those guys down the road and they're going to sneak over in the middle of the night and burn your thatched hut. Help us build this giant castle, and every time they come after us, we can, you know, we'll open the gate and you can all run inside the castle and be safe. And we can also store food inside this castle for you know, for a siege or for a war or for, you know, even a drought. And out of this kind of medieval perspective, and von Heyer said, and he had traveled the world. I mean, he had worked all across Africa, the Middle East. He'd worked in Asia. He'd worked in South America. One of his assistants was eaten by an alligator in South Africa. And he said, you know, you'll see basically this replicated all over the world. And it's kind of a rule of war that you don't take out the king. Because if you kill that king, then some other king might kill you if you're the king, if you're the decision maker. So kings never kill kings. And the example that Horst von Heyer told me was that he had read, and I recall this, although it's been more than 30 years since, or 20 years anyway, since I read The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, William Schirer's masterpiece, that, you know, the Americans knew what Berchtesgaden was, you know, Hitler's eagle's nest. Hitler had built this house at the top of this mountain. It had a giant elevator that goes up to it. You can still visit it. And it was kind of his summer retreat, and it was where he went to plot the war and stuff. And he was there, 6 months out of every year, or several months out of every year. And it was right up on top of this mountain, and a good bomb could have taken it out. And FDR knew this. And Stalin knew this. But neither one of them would ever authorize bombing Berchtesgaden. Because you don't kill the king. You let the grunts, the warriors, kill each other. But you have to have the kings around to negotiate the terms of peace or the surrender or whatever, however the war ends. And you don't kill the princes. And that's why during World War II and during the Vietnam War and during the Iraq War and during the Afghan War, during the first and second Iraq wars, I'm sure that there was heightened security for people who were, say, Pentagon officials or members of the cabinet. But, they weren't expecting that, like during Vietnam, we were in a proxy war with the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was openly supporting the Viet Cong. We were openly supporting the Diem and subsequent administrations in South Vietnam. And they never tried to take out, a cabinet member, the Soviets. They never attacked the United States. Or if one of our cabinet members, or if the Speaker of the House or the Majority Leader of the Senate was traveling overseas, they didn't try and kill them. Because they knew that would alter the rules of war in such a way that, the rich and powerful would suddenly be in the crosshairs. And the rich and powerful won't put up with that. Now, I think this entire system is bizarre and corrupt and should be, at the very least, questioned and discussed. And it's something that we literally never discuss. And we started having this conversation on Friday. And I noticed that it was completely shut down over the weekend. But there were some people on Friday who, and in fact, I had a caller into this program on Friday who said, I think that what Donald Trump did was right. It was a good thing to take out a bad guy. And what's your response? And I started doing this rambling thing about, it was terrible. And what I was trying to build up to was basically, you don't kill the princes. You kill the soldiers. And I'm wondering, and again, I am not a graduate of the War College. I've been through the police academy in Georgia, but I've never been through a war college. So if any of you have been, officers or flag officers in particular, and you understand the rules of war, please educate me. What are the cutoff points? Who are the targets that you wouldn't take? If Stalin and Roosevelt chose not to take out Hitler, and Hitler chose not to take out Stalin and Roosevelt, and he could have bombed the White House or the Kremlin. Tojo didn't even, Tojo just took out Hawaii, took out Pearl Harbor. What's the limit? What's the cutoff point of who you don't assassinate? And did Donald Trump just change the rules of war for the entire world? Or did Donald Trump just change the rules of war as they relate to any country that finds itself in a position of conflict with the United States? Now, it may be that, Russia and China are going to, if they got into a conflict, actually they seem to be becoming allies. Let's say France and China got into a conflict. It may be that the Chinese, President Xi would never say, hey, let's take out President Macron, and Macron would never say, oh, we're going to take out President Xi. But if either one of them got into an open conflict with the United States, would they go after senior officials in the administration instead of the military? Now, I think Iran has kind of backed away from this a bit in the public statements that they've made in the last 24 hours, where they have said, expect a military response against military targets. Now, which might blow up my argument, because if you could say, okay, Soleimani was actually the head of the military, and therefore he was a military target, so this doesn't really apply. But my understanding is that he was also the number 3 guy in the government. So that would place him at like the Secretary of Defense or the head of the Joint Chiefs, who traditionally have not been targeted. So I'm not making an assertion here. I think the whole situation, you know, having rules for war. War is organized mass murder. We just need to be very clear about it. You know, David Swanson wrote an absolutely brilliant book a couple of years back that if you haven't read it, it's really worth going out and buying right now. It's called War is a Lie. And he deconstructs all this kind of stuff that I'm talking about. But might there be consequences way beyond the consequences that we're seeing right now from this assassination of the number 3 guy in a government that we're in conflict with? Or was it entirely appropriate because the guy was running a military or a militia? I honestly don't know the answer to that question, but I think that it deserves a conversation between Americans here in the United States.